Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our latest Department of Defense Information Analysis Center webinar that's going to cover the First Responder Vaccine Initiative. My name is Steve Rutherford, and I have the privilege of being the director of the HDIAC, and today we're hosting Dr. Tom Zink for today's presentation. I want to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for taking time out to join us today for this exciting and very relevant, timely topic. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center. The DTIC mission is to collect, synthesize, produce, and disseminate scientific and technical information. If you've not checked out DTIC's website at www.discover.dtic.mil, I encourage you to take a look at their myriad offerings. Without DTIC sponsorship, this webinar series just wouldn't be possible. So as always, we got to kick this off with a few admin notes. Please note that all of your attendee lines have been muted. So if you have a question during the webinar, we're going to ask you to submit them using the attendee chat box there on the left-hand side of the screen. And we'll work to save the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation to go over these questions and discuss them. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link for that recording, as well as these slides, will be available at the HDI website for later download for our registered members. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Dr. Thomas Zink. Dr. Zink is a founder and chief executive of Project Equal Immunization Policies and Practices, acronym is EQUIPP. He currently serves as the biosecurity advisor to Project to Ready Emergency Personnel for an Anthrax Release Event, and is a senior medical advisor to the mayor of St. Louis, Missouri. Additionally, Tom is a member of the Domestic Preparedness, or DOMPREP, Journal of International Preparedness Leadership Council, and a chairman of the Immunization Work Group Emergency Service Coalition for Medical Preparedness. He has taught several courses and held multiple positions concerning emergency preparedness, biosecurity, and epidemic studies at St. Louis University. Dr. Zink received his Bachelor of Arts in Biology and Doctor of Medicine from the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Medicine. Tom, as a former Chem Bio commander, I really want to thank you as we start out today, and I want to say it's our distinct honor to host you today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the kind words. Good morning, everyone. Afternoon over on the east side, for sure, of the country. And I look forward to spending a few minutes with you to give you an update on what we're up to here with the First Responder Vaccine Initiative out of the Department of Homeland Security Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction Office. I'd also like to give a shout out and thank you to Amber Garvey for helping lead me through the preparation for this program. And I think it's important for me to also give full disclosure that in the early 2000s, I joined Emergent Biosolutions as their inaugural chief medical officer. And I served in that role for 2.5 years, taking Emergent through a couple of mergers, or reorganizing their quality and occupational health programs, as well as going around the world and introducing the anthrax vaccine, for which we're talking about today, to U.S. allies, and serving as the liaison to our own Department of Defense when it came to the use of the anthrax vaccine. One of the things I'd had hoped we would do when the company became a little bit more sturdy on its feet was to expand the effort of the anthrax vaccine beyond that which we had with the federal government of the United States and other allies, and take it from the combatants to the heroes, which is what we're talking about today, the notion of we have Main Street heroes that defend the United States on our soil and would be the first on the scene, would have to work within and beyond and around a wide aerosolized anthrax release. And it made sense to me as a medical doctor leading the company that made the anthrax vaccine, that it would be smart for us to push forward and try to get this to our civilian heroes as soon as possible as well. That was not in the cards necessarily in those earlier days and years. And after we took the company to public offering at the New York Stock Exchange, I was able to basically retire and sever my relationships completely with the company. Unfortunately, I still have many friends there, but I don't have any financial ties at all with Emergent Biosolutions, who is the manufacturer of the current anthrax vaccine that we use and sell to the federal government and buy. Okay, so I'd like to move to the next slide and start off with talking a little bit about the idea, getting everybody on the same page. The context in which we find ourselves with the First Responder Vaccine Initiative is one in which we endured in 2001 a multi-wave, multi-site lethal attack on the United States in the country itself. We have 5 letters sent to the news affiliates, ABC, NBC, CBS, sent to the New York Post and the American Media, which is the publisher of National Enquirer. And they all came from a Trenton, New Jersey postmark. One of the employees of American Media, Bob Stevens, was hospitalized on October 4th, and he died 3 days later, or the next day, actually, I guess it was, and logging our first anthrax death in over 25 years. The anthrax was found in the Boca Raton, Florida offices of the American Media National Enquirer building, and more letters were found laced with anthrax through the Postal Service. An NBC employee in New York City tested positive on October 12th for anthrax poisoning. A visitor to another affiliate, the CBS situation, tested positive for anthrax as well. 2 postal workers in the Brentwood facility in Washington, D.C. were confirmed to have died from the inhalation anthrax. A 7-month-old son of the ABC News freelance producer was visiting in the offices of ABC News in their Manhattan office and became affected with a cutaneous anthrax, which was at first diagnosed as a brown recluse spider bite because of the way it showed up as a brown, scaly, and swollen and reddened skin lesion. That child survived, but had to go through several months of fighting for their lives because of kidney failure and many of the other consequences of this toxin that's released once the bacteria takes hold. I won't go into any further about that, about these other individuals that were affected, but suffice it to say that 5 people died, over 25 people were affected from an illness. But thousands and thousands of people, especially in the Capitol building and Capitol region, were also affected when it was noted that Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle's office, along with Patrick Leahy, both Democrats, offices were affected by a very interesting powder that turned out to be weaponized anthrax. The context is that there are concerns that in those attacks, the actual grade of the weapon was different. They both came from the same DNA, essentially. The RMR 1029 that's found in our USAMRIID, U.S. Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases. But there were some unique characteristics in the Daschle concoction, things that not normally are noticed unless it was a weaponized effort, very sophisticated manufacturing capabilities. And I think the reason why we bring this up at this point is it tells us that this isn't just a naturally occurring anthrax event that may happen when you are out in the nature areas and you're sleeping out in your sleeping bag and you're hanging out with a bunch of rotted wood and dust is flying up, and there's a chance you might inhale a naturally occurring spore of anthrax. But actually this was fairly sophisticated, very sophisticated stuff in some cases, that really kind of punched us in the nose and made several of us who understand how anthrax works in a weaponized format very concerned. And, you know, the idea of vaccinating not only our firefighters and policemen and others that are potentially targeted, even though it's a great idea, it really didn't come from my knowledge at least, it didn't really come from the company. It didn't come from any other than a letter to the CDC director at that time was Dr. Jeff Copeland, that came from Harold Schaeberger, the general president of the International Association of Firefighters. And it was written in October 12, 2001, in which he says, and I quote, "As we've already seen, firefighters and emergency medical personnel will be amongst the first victims of terrorist attacks. It is now possible that biologic agents have been used against American citizens. On behalf of the 245,000 members of the International Association of Firefighters, we call on the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to immediately provide anthrax and smallpox vaccinations for the firefighters and other first responders to suspected biological agents incidents." This was a letter and a great idea that was on the books in October 12, 2001. So I wish we could take and grab it and say, hey, we were the ones that thought of the idea, but those who were in the harm's way were the ones that were first interested in getting that protection, which is available pursuant to the vaccine. The CDC stance, however, in 2002, kind of tapped the brakes on all that. They had not looked into seriously those emergency first responders, federal responders, medical practitioners, and private citizens that might be considered for pre-exposure vaccine. It was not recommended even after 2001 and the entire episode on Capitol Hill. It was considered that too hard for us to calculate the actual risk of exposure. So therefore, the risk to benefit ratio was not easily calculated. And even though the idea of establishing a layered approach with all these high-tech options, BioShield, CRI, BioWatch, were in place, the first one was overlooked in terms of prevention, and the best, by Dr. Copeland, by the way, spoken, has told us that the most cost-effective means to prevent an infection is vaccination. So we kept pushing the notion that maybe we should think ahead and change the way the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, works, how they were thinking about these things. They were always thinking about the risk to benefit ratios. And so we introduced at the ACIP, at the CDC, the notion of threat. And that the threat is a function of three variables: the probability, intent, times capability. So you have an intention to do harm, and you have the capability to do so. The vulnerability of the target and the impact that makes. And if we look at this equation, now we don't have to try to calculate the risk, which is oftentimes something that won't be shared with the lay people of the advisory committees of these various governmental entities. Rather, now we can start doing something and figuring out what can we do to reduce these all to zero. If any of these variables approach zero, so does the threat. So let's talk about probability for a minute. The probability, for me, back in those days in the mid-2000s, first decade, the probability had already slapped us in the face. We had already had a very important multi-wave, multi-site attack. It was, in some regards, the weapon was very sophisticated. And it made sense to us that perhaps, we should think about prevention. U.S. Department of Defense mandatory anthrax vaccination and immunization program kind of gave us a thought of, well, monkey see, monkey do. We don't have top secret top secret clearances so let's watch those who do and see what they do to protect themselves. And of course, the leadership, at that time, the Chief Medical Officer of Homeland Security, Jeff Runge, was quoted as saying, the universal adversaries have anthrax weaponization expertise. The Department of Homeland Security Secretary Chertoff sent a letter to Secretary Leavitt in 2008 saying that he urged Leavitt to employ all relevant emergency powers to ensure distribution of the pre-need countermeasures that may be effective in preventing the contraction of anthrax by people in the delivery chain, such as UPS, USP, U.S. Postal Service workers, first responders, law enforcement, non-government workers that are essential to the government and to the general public. There was a bipartisan commission on the prevention of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. In 2008 called for rapid response, and 2009 asserted that anthrax is the most likely bioterrorism threat. And so then, finally, in 2010, the CDC took heed of these probability components and started to study it in a special working group as to whether or not the anthrax vaccine could be approved for use throughout. If we look at vulnerability, we really are quite and considerably vulnerable. These spores, even in natural situations, survive for 40 years. They're naturally resistant to environment. They're very small anyway in normal efforts in the natural state, but then in a weaponization, they're made to be even smaller. So they're highly respirable. They can be inhaled and deeply into your lungs very quickly. And they tend to remain suspended because they're so small. So in a dry office environment, for instance, a study using surface sampling in a contaminated area found that 70% of the spores were lost to not settle. They were essentially lost to the air and continued to move around. And the diminution of size that we do when we make this weapon, the change in the electrostatic charge, there was also a technique. And then to genetically engineer it for multi-drug antibiotic resistance, as well as surface treatment to reduce clumping, are all ways to increase the vulnerability of the target population. Anthrax is invisible, it's odorless, tasteless, and it's easily re-aerosolized in nature. The weaponized spores are even more so readily dissipated to a gaseous phase and cannot be seen. These are all sort of pertinent comments as we talk about whether we should be wearing masks or not during this COVID situation. Identifying the safe zone is not easy. As a matter of fact, 6 out of 9 of the hazmat professionals, these are top-notch professionals that responded to the Hart Senate office building attack, were exposed and were found to later have antibodies, which was not only they only exposed, but they were also infected. And so if 6 out of our 9 hazmat professionals didn't know where to don their personal protective equipment, is a good way to demonstrate that anthrax that's weaponized is hard to know where the hot zone begins and the safe zone ends. So again, this is all talking about how we're vulnerable. We don't have to have a lot of spores to give us the infection. And the LD1, the lethal dose for just one person to die may be as low as 1 to 3 spores. And we're talking about spores that are very small in size. So, and then once you're infected, again about vulnerability, untreated anthrax in all forms, whether it be on the skin, whether it be inhalational or actually ingested, can lead to death from the toxins that are formed by the bacterium. And you can appropriately treat cutaneous anthrax and the mortality is less than 1%, like that young child that was visiting in the ABC area. But in fall 2001, the case fatality rate equaled 45%. 5 out of the 11 people with inhalation disease died. And gastrointestinal disease, if you do ingest it for some reason for contaminated food or whatever, is about a 50% mortality rate. This is a serious disease. And it's not infection that kills you. It's the toxins that are formed by those bacteria. And that's how the vaccine works, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I could go on about the vulnerability that we have, speak a little bit about continuous sampling detectors and USPS and BioWatch technology with the 12 and 36-hour lags and things like that. I don't think that's a good use of our time as we want to start to learn more about what can we actually do. Suffice to say that all this information about vulnerability and how the actual weapon is actually is formed, made, and behaves was very influential to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. And I think what made a lot of sense to them is that the most worrisome vulnerability is that anthrax has been made to resist every known antibiotic that was generated for purposes of treating that infection. And if we are going to rely on antibiotics post a wide aerosolized anthrax release, we're going to have some troubles on our hand. And thank goodness the anthrax that was released on Capitol Hill was apparently sensitive to our antibiotics that we have and that we use. Our current postal plan and pods, the points of distribution and dissemination and so on, again, works too long, takes too long. We're noticing it now with COVID-19, how tough and how hard it is to get one of these dissemination programs up and running efficiently, how long it takes. We know that in these kinds of infections, we have to move very quickly, especially within 5 to 7 days. 50% of the people who are infected with anthrax, inhalational anthrax, are already passing away. And antibiotics have to work for up to 60 days if you're also going to try to give them a vaccine. So the use of a vaccine ought not be something that's done after exposure. Just like all vaccines, they work best before you ever encounter the organism against which it was built to fight and help you fight. And so the main driver, I believe, for a lot of the pundits and the advisors on the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices that ultimately agreed that emergency responders ought to be given the opportunity to be vaccinated was the fact that there is antibiotic-resistant anthrax, and post-exposure antibiotics afford no protection, and post-exposure vaccination cannot be expected to confirm immunity to the vaccines in time. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about the impact in the impact of such an attack. There is a little graphic that we have here for you that in our past experience in Capitol Hill, 30,000 people had to receive antibiotics, not to mention that only about 23% of them actually stayed on the antibiotics for the 60 days that they were required to do so. So we have that kind of recidivism that doesn't bode well if you're trying to protect yourself from a deal. These antibiotics are not easy on the body, tough to take. I'm a physician, and it's hard for me to take my antibiotics for a common cold or whatever I'm been prescribed, a sinusitis or something like that. I have a tough time just taking 7 days worth. It's just hard to think of someone taking 60 days and all the side effects that can happen in that situation. The current threat from aerosol release is one that is why we're most concerned about trying to get anthrax vaccination out way before we ever have a situation in which our adversaries would like to release this. 1 to 2 kilograms could could make an enormously dangerous impact to the United States and anyone upon which it rained down. So let's see where we go. So that gives us the rationale why the CDC then came up in July 23rd, 2010, and giving a permissive guidance regarding the pre-exposure vaccination emergency responder organizations. Preparedness is local. So the next step in this whole situation is to give a chance to get it going. And we want to see whether or not we have a welcoming body of individuals who are the Main Street heroes. And so in 2009 and 10, to kind of help inform the ACIP, the Homeland Security System of Missouri presented a survey to two groups at two different meetings that were being held, and random individuals that came to the several sporting events that were monitoring for bioterrorism and other terrorist opportunities. And we found that if offered, 63% of the people would receive the vaccine. So we thought that was a pretty decent number of people to continue to try to figure out how we can protect them. Another 24% were undecided. And we knew that if we could give some information that we've shared with you this morning to these individuals, that a few of them would probably come along and want to be vaccinated at all. And then there was a strong, 13% that said, I'm just not a vaccine person. Don't want vaccines, don't like them, don't want to be bothered about it. And so then as we started to move closer to getting more information done, more movement afoot to get to the first responder vaccine initiative, finding supporters in Congress and informing subcommittees and working with Homeland Security individuals on the best way to proceed in those regards. We did another survey, a much more elaborate survey. 4 times as many people were engaged. It was done in a more professional manner than the other one in 2009-10, and pretty much the same pattern came out, and that 55%, a little less. Now we're that much more removed from the 2001 attacks, the 2005 discussions, and all throughout to 2010 at the ACIP. We're about 6 years more removed. So we had a few less that would say they would be vaccinated. But those that didn't know were sort of shifting back over to the undecided. And we felt like, again, if we would give them the proper education, that they might shift their way to us. So we wanted to learn about the targets locally, and we've got this information. In the meanwhile, the First Responder Anthrax Preparedness Act was working its way through the government, and ultimately, thanks to it being introduced originally in the House, and passed on July 29th in 2015, and then moved over to the Senate. One of our senators from Missouri is Claire McCaskill, and we always will hold her dear to our heart now that she's retired, because she was in the Senate subcommittee that voted unanimously to push this through for President Obama to sign into law on the December, right before he left office in 2016. So our target then is to prevent anthrax vaccination, give pre-event anthrax vaccination, and offer it to a pilot state if we could, and engage it in response activities that might lead to exposure aerosolized anthrax release. That's pretty much what the First Responder Anthrax Preparedness Act, Public Law 114-268, stated. Pre-event anthrax vaccine may be offered by a participating pilot state to eligible emergency responders who are engaged in response activities that might lead to exposure to aerosolized anthrax spores. So now, if we have that clearance, then we want to be sure that we have an ability to get the vaccine in a way that's cost effective. And that enter in the Strategic National Stockpile. One of the things that I knew very carefully about and was spearheading for the company back in the mid to early 2000s was the notion of expanding the shelf life of this vaccine from 3 years shelf life to 4 years. Currently, at 4-year shelf life, the anthrax vaccine is the only vaccine that has that long of a shelf life. There's no others that have gone for that just now. To get shelf life that long, by the way, especially in biologics, you have to have 2 more years beyond that of safety data, potency data, sterility, and stability. So these vaccines that are in our Strategic National Stockpile may only have a 4-year dating shelf life, but actually there's data that supports that they're good for another 2 more years after that. So that's sort of like a nice little safety net for us in case we need to ramp this up considerably. We may be able to, through emergency use authorizations and education of the FDA and others, still use vaccine even though it might be expired. That's sort of like a safety net. We would like to use vaccine that's not expired, and we would like to rotate out short-dated vaccine from the Strategic National Stockpile to supply any outreach to first responders and others that are in a higher risk of being given or targeted for an anthrax release like that, which we endured in 2001. This vaccine is licensed by the federal government since 1970. We should talk a little bit about it. It primes the immune system to neutralize one of the toxins that anthrax makes once it germinates from its spore dormant stage into an active bacteria. 3 toxins are spewed out of the bacteria into the host. Those toxins have to work together to successfully attack the host and to cause the toxic death that we're also hoping to avoid. And those 3 toxins are called the lethal toxin, the edema toxin, and the protective antigen. Without the protective antigen or without any of the other 2, they can't triangulate. If they can't triangulate, they cannot enter into a healthy cell. And if they don't enter into the cell, they are cleaned up by our systems, our liver and our kidneys, without any incident other than maybe feeling like you got a cold. So what this vaccine does is it primes the body's defenses to recognize that protective antigen, the antigen that's most active in getting the other 2 toxins into the cells. And once the body has received the vaccine and has been primed to recognize the protective antigen, if it sees the protective antigen at a later date, it attacks that, destroys it. The other toxins are cleared harmlessly in the body. And that's how our anthrax vaccine works in very simple format. There is no anthrax that's given to people through this vaccine, and that protective antigen is sterilized to the point and altered to the point just enough that it's recognized and it works in terms of our immunogenicity, but it it would not be useful to work with other toxins that might be naturally found in case you're an outdoorsman or something like that and you ran in. It's not like we're giving the protective antigen to bolster the situation. It works very well. This vaccine has been the most studied vaccine that we have in our vaccine armamentarium. The efficacy was studied the only time ever that in the modern era was a vaccine studied in live participants that were constantly being exposed to the spores, and that was in a wool mill workers effort by the CDC in 1962 to 1974. About 7,000 participants took part in this. In the earlier years, we could do studies like this, but now we realize that this isn't the smartest way to go about trying to out something. We'd rather do laboratory studies versus and modeling versus on actual people. But in that 6,986 participants, 24 cases of cutaneous anthrax was found in unvaccinated workers. 3 cases of cutaneous anthrax was found in people vaccinated with only 1 or 2 doses, and no cases of anthrax were reported. No cases of cutaneous or inhalational was reported in fully vaccinated individuals, and no deaths in individuals vaccinated with at least 2 doses. So we realize that we have a very good vaccine here, and it's one in which we feel the efficacy is magnificent. The study documents essentially a vaccine efficacy of 92.5% for protection against anthrax, both in the cutaneous and inhalation types. And it's based on person time of occupational exposure, meaning these people were, for 8 hours a day, constantly being exposed. It wasn't like just a random exposure. The other thing that is important about this vaccine is the safety of the vaccine. The safety of this vaccine has been, again, studied more than anyone else because it was used on military personnel up front for the most part. And at one point, Secretary Rumsfeld at the time made it an order that if not followed would end in court-martial for our military to become vaccinated against anthrax. This was in the 1999-2000 timeframe, 2001 even, wherein something was afoot. Those with top secret security understood something might be going on, and they decided that all uniformed personnel, either in the Central Command or the Korean Peninsula, or those that were designated in Homeland Security roles in the United States, were to become vaccinated, both uniformed and civilian. And that caused some ruckus. Many people, not too many, but some people pushed back, said, I don't want this vaccine. You can go ahead and court-martial me. And then civil courts became involved. And consequently, as a result, there was a lot of push to try to decide or to prove this vaccine was unsafe and that these people that didn't want to follow the orders were justified because of the lack of safety. So this vaccine's been studied in more than 24 humans. 24 human studies, and we have and it has been assessed by 4 or 5 major committees, one being the Anthrax Expert Vaccine Committee, the other being, again, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, the Armed Forces Epidemiology Board, and so on. And overwhelmingly, in every situation, it's been found to be a very safe vaccine. And if anyone would like to have the compilation of those studies, I'd be very happy to send it to you by email if you'll just let me know that you would like. It's the safety of this vaccine is unparalleled, and it's improved now that the route of administration changed from just under the skin to deep into the muscle. So, having laid the groundwork on why this is a good idea and it's a very safe one, we were offered an opportunity to, along with a number of other cities and counties, to put in a bid for the First Responder Vaccine Initiative and to demonstrate how this might be done. And we started what we call Project PREPARE, and program to ready emergency personnel for an anthrax release event. And we, this is sort of our battle cry here: identify, reach, communicate, tailor, execute, and document. We chose immediately a partner of extraordinary talent and resources, the Emergency Care Research Corps, Washington University. They helped us pull together the proposal for Homeland Security. We won the notice of funding opportunity. The city of St. Louis and the county has come on and helped. And we have proceeded in this just same fashion, developed a survey database so that we give to people when they enter into the program, come listen to the 25 to 35 minute educational session, meet with them, try to find out who it is that would like to participate in this with us, and found that there was a lot of interest, very much excited about the idea. And these heroes would also introduce us to critical infrastructure partners within their groups, like the Office of Emergency Management partners and other federal partners. And so it's been built on a long-standing grassroots interest already in our region, but was received in open arms more surprisingly than we had thought. We had plenty of facility space that we needed at Washington University. We actually have a vaccine suite in which people can come asynchronously and become vaccinated as they need. We have a BSL2 lab. More importantly to me was the ability to inventory and temperature monitor the vaccine in the in that region, in that building. Those buildings over there are the places that we go ahead and store the vaccine while we wait to use it once we receive it from the Strategic National Stockpile. We've built up a great database of constituents and surveys, which we're studying right now. And we use the software data management to help us pull these points together. The partner engagement that we've been working with is first the city Department of Health, the county Department of Health, as well as all law enforcement, fire and rescue, first receivers, and those that serve as 911 operators. Our critical infrastructure personnel are basically, we encourage our participants to think of their continuity of operations and continuity of government and governance in certain buildings. And we've also moved to mutual aid, such as the Office of the FBI and our troop, our State Highway Patrol troop that covers our region. We've stayed within the St. Louis City and St. Louis County areas, but we did move to other Missouri counties that offer us mutual aid for large events, such as our 4th of July fireworks and the World Series and the hockey Stanley Cup and stuff like that, and that they also have participated in it as well. Here are our results to date in a very graphic way. We have in-person education that we provided to 1,659 folks. Of those, 1,095 have been vaccinated right after the educational component, which lasts about 25 minutes to 30 minutes, sometimes a little longer with questions. The virtual, we've moved to virtual because of COVID and concerns people had about coming together. We've done 30 virtual, mostly with St. Charles, a county next to St. Louis County. For their public health department, we did that virtually, and then we vaccinated in another room with their own people to help. And then we have done asynchronous learning, and the results of that is pending because they're trickling in. And really, we're finding that the asynchronous learning, sending out the lesson and then asking them to set up their own vaccine appointments, has not been a very solid way of translating from education to action. But overall, we feel very strong about those in which we've actually talked to personally to bring them in. We also offer, for those that are interested in it, in the in-person, we offer them continuing education credits. I think it'd be important to also give you a better update on recidivism and lost to follow up, or people who have dropped out of the program. We have 88 out of 1,127 people who have been in the program, have received at least one vaccine and then dropped. That being mostly because of moving or changing their jobs. We've heard on the negative side that the whole schedule is too cumbersome and that they don't want to proceed through that. The schedule for the anthrax vaccine is a primary series of 3 shots, day 0, month 1, month 6, followed by 2 boosters on month 12 and month 18. And that can be considered as a very cumbersome schedule. Around the world, the schedule is to give that primary series sometimes 0, 2, and 4 weeks, but most of the time 0, day 0, 1 month, and month 6, and then booster after that every 3 years. We're looking to see whether or not we can inform the advisory committee on immunization practices and see if they would be interested in entertaining those kinds of opportunities as well. So lastly, I'll just share with you that our type of responders that we've engaged, we have 431 in the program that are from fire and EMS. We have 342 in the program from police and law. And we have 332 emergency receivers in emergency rooms and departments, and then 22 from others. And those generally are the health departments. We have signed up the St. Louis City Police just this past week. They feel like now all their COVID is taken care of. Everyone's been vaccinated with COVID, and they've all now been 3 weeks since their last shot, and they're wanting to go full steam ahead. That'll beef these numbers up by at least 500. We also are having a similar experience with St. Louis County. And lastly, I'll say, God bless the health department individuals, because they have constantly pushed away what's right for them to take care of what's right for us. And now they're coming in to say that they would like to, now that things are starting to settle down with the COVID, and they seem to have a lot of their activities well in hand, now they're wanting to also be educated and offered the vaccine. We'll be starting the St. Louis City Health Department the first 2 weeks of April, and we're hoping the county will follow thereafter. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions from the group.
Dr. Zink, thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you for the work that you're doing and the initiative. As you and I were talking before we kicked off today, as a military guy who received the full battery of shots, you know, it's just one of the things. You got up and you lied and you said you did it because this might happen. You know, our first responders are going into unknown situations every single day. So thank you for your effort and thank them for their dedication. David Reddick asked, so you gave a chart up front that was kind of your pre-analysis of, you know, who would take it, who didn't know enough, who said flat no. What percentage how would those charts compare post? What is your experience showing you for those that are flat turning it down, those are taking it? I know you're analyzing the data now, but what are you seeing?
Well, as I click back to our results to date, we're right at 67% uptake in those people who are getting the program as it was originally designed, either to be given by virtually or in person. And that jives pretty well with the information that we got when we did the couple of data crunches or questionnaires that we sent out. In 2009, we had 63% said they would receive the vaccine. And then the St. Louis University Emergency Personnel Immunization Quest program that we had there, we are at 55 said they would take it. So I think we're happily about where we predicted we would be through pre-program opinion polling. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do have a history of terrorist use of anthrax here inside the United States, so you do have some background for it. But the list of bioagents, for those of us who joined us for Christina Baxter's presentation several months ago on biological threats, the list of bioagents is quite long. Daryl Johnston was curious what your thoughts are expanding this effort. Say, I think smallpox is a good example, perhaps. I know there's a fast-track vaccine for ricin right now that's out there, been out for about a year that they're working on. What are your thoughts on expanding beyond anthrax?
Well, when we were doing the preliminary outreach to these constituents as to whether or not they'd have a stomach for being vaccinated, one of the impetuses of that study was the fact that we found 50% of the people that were in the Missouri State Homeland Security initiative weren't vaccinated against tetanus. They were still either not vaccinated properly or they weren't boosted. And then we also found in that questionnaire that only about 15% of them were actually vaccinated against hepatitis A. Hepatitis A being actually a bloodborne pathogen, people don't talk much about that. But bodily fluids can pass on to you hepatitis A, and if you're going to be helping in a structural collapse or something like that, you're going to be encountering some of these fluids at the very least. And we really think that a whole comprehensive look at just our basic vaccine status in these heroes that defend Main Street USA is our first step. And I think at that point we want to go ahead and ask about some of the other biological threats that are out there, such as smallpox. We did try to vaccinate people in smallpox. I was not a part of that effort back in the 2001 and 2 era. But it was not well received once it became 2 things were noticed. One is you had to keep your smallpox vaccine area covered, and you had to avoid young children, grandbabies, and children of your own while that was still a weeping wound, because it could convey smallpox actually to those individuals with whom you might brush up against. And number 2, there was a rare but an important adverse event in which a bacterial inflammatory response could occur in the heart itself and cause people to have any number of different problems with either arrhythmias, rhythms that are of their heart that aren't efficient, and even heart failure. So because of some of the side effects of these vaccines, we have to be careful how we proceed, and that we do really pay attention to the risk-benefit ratio when we have those data, and also try to understand where we are with the threat equation that we went over with at great detail at the beginning of the presentation. I think that if we're going to proceed and move this program beyond the demonstration projects here in Missouri and in Mississippi, I think that we probably need to keep it simple first, build up the infrastructure of bringing these individuals in so doing, build up their trust in the whole notion of pre-event vaccination, and then expand according to the current intelligence that we might have that can be in some way shared with us without breaching confidentialities.
Yeah, it's certainly a major undertaking when you're talking about metropolitan areas like New York City with 11,000 some odd firefighters and probably 3 times that many police. So yeah, that certainly is something that is point well made.
One of the things that we've looked. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, sir. Please go ahead.
One of the things I was just going to say is that when it comes to doing things that prevent illness, the human tends to put that off, and part of the reason why we're seeing the troubles we are with COVID is that it's not so much about COVID, it's about those that COVID attacks. And those that haven't taken care of themselves and have problems with chronic illnesses and so forth are much more vulnerable. So the goal here is to try to teach our heroes on Main Street, take care of yourself. Without you, we're worthless. We need you to be there. Here's how you need to take care of yourself. And by the way, one of the best ways to do so is to be sure you're up to date on your vaccines. So a whole new initiative around wellness and health and disease prevention is probably, I think, around the corner, because we're learning that with COVID. And we ought to take advantage of some of these newfound funding sources to help us begin and and maybe renew what has already been pushed over the last 30 years of getting healthier and staying healthy. And part of that is through vaccination.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Preventive measures come in a variety of forms. So,
right.
One of your colleagues at DHS, Don Punkavar, made the point that to the group that DHS is assessing your pilot program, and they're going to work with Health and Human Services to make recommendations for the future. If I had to ask you, put you on the spot for some quick look lessons learned, maybe 1 or 2, what would you have to offer to the group?
The first, I think, the reason why we are very successful in just our eastern region of Missouri is we've been tenderizing this market for many years. We have a number of constituents that are representatives of the unions, that are part of the leadership, that have all been in favor of anthrax as a preventive measure for the rank and file and for all of these experts. So start before you've got a program. Start talking about it. Find and build consensus as early as you possibly can. Discuss the concerns. Don't push them off. They're real and rational, and that would be the first thing. It's pretty much building a foundation from which you can then leapfrog into whatever area you think is the most important at this point in time. And don't try to. I was surprised at how well this worked. During the smallpox time frame, I was told by a number of individuals that helped us in this program that people couldn't make a decision right after because of the adverse events. And so having a room where you give them the presentation and then have them walk through a door to roll up their sleeve immediately after that didn't work with smallpox. And it didn't because of the complex adverse event profile. They needed to go home and talk about it. They need to wonder about, how soon are we going to see the grandbabies? They need to talk with their spouses. So understanding what's been done before and how people view it will help you plan your program. This program worked really well for us because of the wonderful safety profile of the anthrax vaccine, and because it's really our only effort. I mean, with antibiotic-resistant anthrax, you just don't have a chance if you get infected with that weapon. And so, at least those who are vaccinated will have a fighting chance. And so you have to get to that decision-making conversation quickly. What happens if I don't do it? And be truthful about it, and have data to back it up, articles and so forth, and other professional opinions that you can share, and have dialogue. And then finally, be safe be very careful in picking your first step, because if you pick too big of a bite, you can end up failing to the point where even the staff and the team starts wondering, is this something we can really do or not? And I think that's what we ran up against in a lot of the COVID outreach, is it was not well planned enough to the point where even those that are trying to do it were shaking their heads like, God, we can't get this done. I don't know how we can do this. And then, rather than fail, you become inert. So those are the three things that I would push for right up front.
Well, thanks, Tom. I think those are all very insightful recommendations, and I'm sure well received. So I think that's all we have time for today. And I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. In particular, I'd like to thank Dr. Zink for taking time out to give us this presentation. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the slides and recording this presentation are going to be made available for download at the HDIAC website, www.hdIAC.org, and they'll be available shortly after this recording is completed. If any of you are interested in learning more about the IACs or in getting involved as a subject matter expert or presenter, just expanding your presence in the HD community, please feel free to reach out directly. You're going to see some contact information come up on the left-hand side of your screen. You can use that to reach us. In addition to these monthly webinars, the HDIAC also offers monthly podcasts, biweekly email digest, as well as a technical inquiry services up to 4 free hours of technical consulting. We also can perform state, local, federal government, customer-funded work in any of our technical areas via our pre-competed contract vehicle. I encourage you to take a look at our past products, particularly for those of you that are interested in CBRN. We've had several presentations on that have been very well received. So again, see that contact information in the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen. If you enjoy all these products, please like us and follow us on social media as well. We like to see your comments. And then finally, be sure to join us here in a week on 8 April for a webinar titled The Changing Nature of Alliances, Rising Powers Perspectives, to be given by Dr. Mihaela Papa, Adjunct Assistant Professor in Sustainable Development and Global Governance at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. So Dr. Zink, thank you. To our audience, thank you for your time today. Best regards to all of you, and I hope you stay well.
Thank you. God bless.